When the light is on, it's on.
Very
My grandkids notice now.
All right, I'm going to get us started. This is the City of Eugene Budget Committee meeting, our first official meeting for, yes, I will. So just a couple of announcements. One is for those of you who are not familiar, these little devices on your tables are microphones. They are fairly sensitive, so if you are having a private conversation, you might want to move back from the microphone, or you can push the little button and that will temporarily turn it off. Also, rustling papers and such on it can be distracting, so be mindful of that too, please. And also, this meeting is being televised, as a number of our budget committee meetings are, hopefully all of them, but sometimes there are technical issues that get in the way. But this one is currently being televised, so just wanted to make you aware of that. And although most of us gathered for the city council retreat, I thought it still might be nice to just go around and do a quick introduction of folks around the table. And I'll start. I'm Claire Surratt. I'm the chair, citizen member, and Shanda is going to be a little bit late. She's co-chair. Vice chair. She'll be here shortly.
George Poling, Eugene City Council, Ward 4.
Mark Rust, new citizen member to the Budget Committee.
Pat Farr, Eugene City Council from Bethel.
Chelsea Clinton, new citizen member to the Budget Committee.
George Brown, Eugene City Council, Ward 1.
Betty Taylor, Councilor, Ward 2.
Ken Beeson, new member of the Budget Committee.
Andrew Ortiz, City Councilor, Ward 7.
John Borofsky, Budget Committee member. Chris Pryor, Eugene City Council, representing Ward 8.
Laura Illig, new Citizen Budget Committee member.
Alan Zelenka, City Council. Doug Smith, Budget Committee member.
Katie Piercy, Mayor.
Sue Kutzer-George, Finance.
Sarah Maderi, Assistant City Manager and Interim Planning and Development Director.
John Reese, City Manager.
Great. And we're also missing Councilor Clark, who couldn't be here this evening. So I just wanted to say a couple of things before I turn it over to the city manager or Sue, for the general fund forecast update. Just to remind us all that we're engaging in a different process in terms of how we approach our budget deliberations, and so that might make for some questions about how we want to proceed at the next meetings and that kind of thing. So please feel free to raise your concerns or suggestions around that as we move forward. It may end up looking very much like the deliberations we've done in the past, but because depending on what we see this evening, that may spark a different way of how we want to approach. But my expectation is that after we get our presentation and have some time for discussion, that you guys will have some particular program areas or pieces of information that you're going to be asking to see, hopefully, at our next meeting. So keep that in mind as you're getting this presentation. And then for our newer members, I just wanted to let you know that in terms of process, we basically operate under Robert's rules. If you're not familiar with that system, we can give you a little update on it. That will really come more into play as we're making motions and considering motions and having to have seconds and amendments and that kind of thing. But I just wanted to set that out there as well. And now I will turn things over to the city manager.
Well, thank you very much, and we very much appreciate being here. It is a different process, a little bit timing-wise particularly, and we would be happy to talk more about that as we go. And I'll start off tonight. Sue will give a general fund forecast, and then I'll get into the FY13 budget. You might remember during the February 11th, there was a budget committee meeting, joint meeting with the council, and really what we tried to do there was outline what the current situation is and where we've been, just so we can set the stage. And one of our primary purposes of presenting the budget earlier is to try to ensure that it's in the full context of our financial situation, to include the budget, but also looking ahead towards sustainable budget, which means funding some of those things that need to be funded, but there aren't dollars for right now. And so we just want to make sure it's in the full context as we roll this out. I'll let Sue start us off, and then I'll get into the piece that we're all waiting for.
Hi. This is the agenda for tonight. As John said, I'll do the forecast update. He'll talk about developing the budget and our budget strategies, and a little bit about next steps. So at our meeting on February 11th, you got the base forecast for the next 6 years. And the base forecast, if you will remember, is what Councilor Pryor referred to as sort of taking our hands off the steering wheel and just moving forward with the service system that we have in FY12, with policy choices that you've made already, and with updates to our revenues and expenditure assumptions like property taxes, PERS rate increases, and that sort of thing. If we move forward and don't take any action to balance our budget over the next 6 years, this is our base forecast, what it would look like. Our revenues are the dark line on the bottom. Expenditures are the red dotted line on top. And what that means is that our expenditures are greater than our revenues every year, which is not a stable or sustainable situation to be in. We estimate our budget gap on average over the next 6 years to be about $7 million. And that's information we presented to you last on February 11th. Moving on to our current strategy. So we're presenting tonight a 2-year strategy where we're trying to align our revenues and expenditures. We're trying to close the gap, that $7 million gap over 2 years, and maintain an 8% reserve. The results of the 2-year strategy would have our revenues and expenditures much more closely aligned, which you can see in this chart. The 2-year strategy has a $4.4 million reduction in FY13 and an additional $2.4 million reduction in FY14. This set of actions over the next 2 years would get us to a stable budget, would not get us to what we would call a sustainable budget. So there are still some things that we are not adequately funding. So some examples are we've been adding to our parks inventory through our bond measures over the last few years, but we have not been adding maintenance budget for those parks. We have pools that need significant renovations, and that's not included in a stable budget, but it would be in a sustainable budget. We're not adequately maintaining our buildings. We have street bonds that are expiring, and so we need to figure out how to pay for our continuation of our street repair program and so forth. So all of those things would be in a sustainable budget. They're not included when we just look at this 2-year forecast strategy that gets us to a stable place.
So you might want to mention that in tab 4, the slides are...
Oh, sorry, yes, the slides are in tab 4. Thank you, Alan. So another way to look at our forecast is to look at the surplus or deficit. And that's where we take the revenues coming in, subtract out our expenditures, and see what the results are. So in our base case forecast where we take no actions to balance our budget over the next couple of years, you can see that dark line on the bottom would be negative numbers in every year. So we're spending more than we're taking in every year. We've got a 2-year strategy. If we just look at the impacts from making the FY13 budget changes, which is about $4.4 million of strategies, we would get to that middle line, the red dotted line. Gets us much closer to a stable place, but doesn't get us quite all the way there. Once we add in some additional strategies in FY14, $2.4 million of additional strategies, the top line gets us to what we would call a stable budget. So you can see it's not perfectly aligned every year because things happen. The bumps in the forecast, the surplus deficit, really have to do with our PERS rate increases that we're anticipating in 15 and 16. But we would say that FY13-14 strategy line is a stable budget. So moving on to another way to look at our financial situation and our financial future is to look at our reserve for revenue shortfall, and that's really our savings account. We have a target of 8% of expenditures for our reserve target, and that's represented by the red dotted line there, and it's around $10-ish million a year. You can see under our base case forecast, if we take the hands off the steering wheel, we would be out of money, basically, in FY14. We would have exhausted our reserves, and then we would go further into the hole, nearly $30 million by the end of the forecast period. That obviously can't happen. So when we take a look at what happens when we build in our FY13 and FY14, our 2-year strategy, that's the line on the top, which is really very close to our reserve target line. So our FY13-14 strategy would put us in pretty good shape compared to our reserve target also. Excuse me. And the last forecast slide, one more thing to look at on the forecast, is this is a surplus deficit chart that shows the effects of holding our personnel costs flat from FY12 to FY13. So if you recall, our personnel costs are 3/4 of our operating budget. And so in order to have a significant impact on our bottom line, we really do have to have some impact on those personnel costs. The FY13 strategy, and if we add in holding our personnel costs flat, get us much closer to that stable budget, and that difference between FY13 and FY14, we would only have to make about $700,000 worth of reductions in FY14 if we're able to hold our personnel costs flat. And that is just flat from 12 to 13. So I think that was pretty much it. If you wanted to take over from there.
We asked questions about the forecast.
Yeah, that'd probably be a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, John.
Sorry about that.
No.
When you built this forecast, have you considered or put in FY12 one-time monies that we see or expect to realize? And what I'm thinking of is if we're going to be looking at things going forward that have significant impact, and we know that there's one-time monies coming in. I mean, I know that there was a property on Franklin Boulevard that's pending sale. There's a vacation of some alleys that add up to some significant numbers. Has that been built into that, or will that just show up in SB1 when the audit comes through?
Those dollars we don't anticipate going into the general fund. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Sometimes those go into road funds when they're alley vacations. I would guess that they're not built in yet because we actually haven't realized the revenue.
Okay.
Checks in the mail.
Any other questions?
Let me kind of talk a little bit about where we've been and where we're headed. And we talked a lot about where we've been the other day, but just as a quick reminder, and this is, in a broad sense, how we've been viewing our budget over the last 3 years and into the future. You might remember our basic philosophy hasn't changed. We've said we want to maintain services, we want to minimize impact on employees, we want to create a stable budget. We've also said we want to minimize fees increases, we want to maintain a reserve, a responsible reserve, and also make strategic investments. That's been our approach the whole time, and it's still our approach going forward. And so all of that is to try to balance that and really align the budget behind council goals.
Andrew.
So can you explain or articulate what you consider a strategic investment?
Things that we've done, all the downtown public safety. We added police officers for the downtown. There was a second Cahoots vehicle. We invested some money in our climate energy action plan a couple years ago. We put $200,000 one-time money into economic development, part of which is earmarked for a match to try to get another airline, low-cost airline, into Eugene. We made our ambulance transport fund. The last couple of years, we put $600,000 each year for that program. So those are the kinds of strategic investments we've been making. So what we've really taken a look at for the last 3 years is we've closed what has been a cumulative $20 million gap. And so you might remember what really has happened over the last several years is this revenue expenditure gap has been created. Originally it was $12 million. That budget, we closed that gap. The next year, another gap was created of 5.5 or so. We closed that gap. Then we had another 2 $7.4 million gap. We closed that gap, and now we have another $7 million gap. And as we talked about, it has to do with the recession and a variety of things. But so we keep working towards that stable budget. $20 million represents about 17% of the general fund. And we're talking primarily about general fund here. We have many other funds. The general fund is about a quarter of our total budget. So the general fund's about $122 million. Total budget's about $500 million. So that's kind of what we're talking about. But this is where all the discretionary money is, which is why we focus so much time on that. So we have gone through and really have made a significant work to get to the $20 million. And if you remember the decisions that you've been making, we have minimized impacts on employees. We've maintained services, and each year we get to a stable budget as we go. And the way we've been doing that, starting on the left side, is we've always said we have to reduce our footprint. We've reduced 80 positions up to this point with minimal service impacts and minimal employee. No employee has involuntarily left the organization. Program and service efficiencies, this is where throughout the organization, city employees have continually tried to be innovative, creative, figure out ways to save money in a lot of different ways, and they've done a lot. We have had some personnel savings. You might remember a couple years ago there were some of the bargaining contracts and the non-reps. There were COLA not given and a variety of things like that. So there have been some personnel savings. And then we have to continue to look in personnel savings, and eventually we still have to do some footprint reductions with service impacts. Can you put up the next slide, Pavel? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that one. Let me start with that one. So what we're saying is that for that $7 million gap, we're still reaching back into those first three buckets, those first three columns, and we'll capture some of that, but we're on the right side for part of this $4.4 million, and we're going to play that out here in just a minute. So then take that next slide that you had up. Next one back, I think.
Yeah.
That one. These are not all in the FY13 strategy, so please don't panic when you see this. Why I'm showing you this came out of the budget document we produced 3 years ago, this list. And what we said at that time was to achieve and balance all the objectives that we have, we are going to work really hard to continue to maintain those services. If they got to a point where we have done and worked and been innovative and pretty much captured most of those, here's the list that we're going to have to start looking at when we get out to that far right side of that previous chart. Reducing the footprint by impacting direct services. So that's that list that was in that budget from 3 years ago, and we'll come back to this in a little bit. So here's what the strategies that we set for FY13. And remember, this is $4.4 million, still more to capture in FY14. But what we said is we want to try to continue to get efficiency savings. And so we allocated out to departments the equivalent of $1,000 of savings per FTE to take a look at those kinds of things. We said we want to hold some memberships and services that we provide in abeyance, meaning we're setting those aside, and at some point we may be able to sort of buy them back, but we're setting some of those aside. We have gone through and done some reorganization in the city where we have been able to combine positions. We've been able to move boxes around and get some savings there. The organization-wide personal savings I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we're also providing services into the community differently, or in some ways reducing those services. And that's that last box. So we'll get into some, go ahead, Pablo. Let's get into some specifics. Last year, this actually is an add, not a subtract. Last year, what the Budget Committee and the Council approved was a one-time appropriation of monies to purchase 10 additional jail beds at Springfield. Given the situation that we have going on with the county, the budget I'm proposing recommends that this is an ongoing add from now into the future. So it's not just a one-time, we're added it in for an ongoing, to continue to have the purchase of jail beds as we go forward. That's a good example of a strategic investment that we want to do.
So for this particular item, is there any way to get a report back on how that was effective and how many people were we able, I mean, just kind of a snapshot, not a whole lot of effort, but just.
Yeah, we'll definitely, we'll take the notes and we'll come back with that kind of information. You bet. Okay, Paul. Here's one from last year. It's the same one as last year, and we're bringing it back this year. This is the one that said, and you might remember last year, we recommended a fire company within a fire station close, and that those personnel, the remaining personnel in that company, actually staff a 4th ambulance. You might remember that conversation. We had a lot of conversation around that. What the council approved was one-time funding, actually, to carry that into this year. And so the budget we're presenting says, okay, we're recommending that same thing again. It's Station 2 in Whitaker. They have 2 companies. Each company requires 9 people to staff it around the clock. What this says is eliminate 3 positions, and that would be through attrition, 3 positions. The other 6 positions that are left in that company would fill an ambulance, add a 4th ambulance to the fleet. Back at Station 2, you'd still have 2 pieces of equipment. When the alarm goes off, the company chooses which piece of equipment that they need to take out onto site and take it out onto site. And so this is the exact same proposal as last year, and so we'll be prepared to answer all of those kinds of questions, talk into some detail, and the chief will be able to do that. Go ahead. Animal services reduction. This one will not be without energy in the community. Right now, what we provide towards animal services is about $1 million of general fund, and that's really broken out into 2 pieces. One is $200,000 of licensing fees goes to the animal services, and another approximately $800,000 of general fund goes to animal services. This would reduce it by $130,000. What we have started is talking with the county as well as Springfield, and we're exploring different models for animal services to include maybe partnerships on the sheltering and adoption side with nonprofits. We're also taking a look at splitting the enforcement and having each individual jurisdiction take on their own enforcement responsibilities. And so we're in the process of an interagency task force working through all of that. But this would be a savings of at least $130,000 in FY13. LRAPA, you know what LRAPA is. We provide $152,000 of annual dues. This would hold those in abeyance, so we would not pay those dues. This is not a comment at all about whether or not LRAPA should or shouldn't move forward. We think it's still a very valuable agency in the community and in this region. But we've said, you know what, given the entire budget situation, we would propose that we hold those in abeyance as we go forward. LCOG, this is for 2 different things. We currently pay $72,000 in annual LCOG fees. This would hold those in abeyance. The rest of that 133, we contract with them for a variety of services. We would still contract with a variety of services from them. But this would say there are some of those services that we would probably keep in-house as opposed to contracting directly with LCOG. And so we would still be a partner in a variety of ways with LCOG. This would just put their annual fees and set those aside for the budget and moving forward. Branch library reduction. This would, and I want to talk about this one in a couple of ways. One, I'll tell you what this is. What this is reducing the Sheldon and Bethel branch libraries from 56 hours to 24 hours per week. So it's about a $575,000 savings ongoing. What this would, and one of the things, remember what we've said is we want to maintain services the best that we can and balance those services. Another very conscious strategy for us is are there things that we can reduce that over time, if the revenues come in over time, that we can build those back up? And so we said, let's not close branch libraries, for example. Let's reduce that, and then we can build it back up if the revenue comes back in. But this would be a reduction from 56 to 24 hours per week in each one of those libraries. Human services, and I want to explain a little bit because there's several different funding sources, so it looks confusing, and it can be. You might remember we have a couple of different ways that human services are funded. This year, for example, we've appropriated in our general fund $1,035,000 over to the Human Services Commission, which is the Lane County branch of that, which then it's undesignated. It goes over to them, and then they can appropriate it and grant it really out to various agencies for a variety of services in the community. We also then have had for the last couple of years one-time additional funding of $150,000 that would go over to HSC. This particular year was specifically for shelter services, but in the past year it's been for different reasons. There's another piece that we have, which is CDBG money. There's $350,000 that gets sent over from CDBG money for HSC. This budget doesn't propose doing anything different with that, so that would continue to go over. We also have designated dollars that we put, some through HSC, some not. The Cahoots vehicles are an example of that. We contract through Whitebird directly with Whitebird for those, and so that's an example of those. What this proposal is that $150,000 of one-time monies, we don't appropriate that again. Says we would reduce that $1,035,000 down to $860,000 of ongoing money. That's that first bullet up there. And in FY13, we would put in $175,000 of one-time money to support some of the efforts that come out of Opportunity Eugene. So the net result of this would be $175,000 less of ongoing money that goes over to HSC as undesignated dollars. And there would be that a one-time put in at the $175,000 for Opportunity Eugene. Yes, Claire.
So this one-time money for Opportunity Eugene, at this point, you're assuming you're going to program that through the HSC?
May or may not, depending on what comes out of that task force. Could or could not. So, but it would go for that. That would be the purpose of that effort. This would be on maintenance along some of our open space for about $31,000. What this would do is impact a little bit of our invasive species control program, some of the maintenance on the pathways and some of those kinds of things. And so that would have an impact, particularly in our open space. So this isn't the actual the community parks. This would be along the ridgeline and in our natural areas. We've done almost $700,000 worth of reorganizations throughout the department, and some of these, as I mentioned before, where we've actually figured out how we can take two positions and create one out of those and still maintain services. Remember, we're still minimizing the impact on employees, so we're not overloading the employees. We're just trying to figure those kinds of things out, so we're doing that. This also includes things like in our prosecutor's office, where we are. We have always had a outside contract for additional legal help on the prosecution side. One of the things that we work with the DA is to actually have interns do some of that work. They've been doing that over at the DA's office for some of their activity. So we would use that kind of a model rather than hiring an outside contractor, so we can actually, they're legal interns out of the law school, so they're qualified to do the work. They'd be working under supervision of an attorney and all. But the DA has done that very effectively with some of their things that they their cases, and so we would do the same kind of thing with some of ours, and so that is a good example of continuing the service but saving money on that. PDD, Planning and Development, is looking at Envision Eugene, and as we go forward, how they can best be organized to support that effort, and so they have an ability to eliminate a couple of positions in that department as well. Central Services, one of the things that the council is going to have to be thinking about is with our lobbying efforts. We are really going to recommend a need to reduce the total number of bills that the council wants actively tracked because we won't be able to do that anymore under the scenario that we're saying. You know, we've been having a part-time person in Salem during the legislative season. Actually, they've been full-time during the season. We brought somebody on. This wouldn't include that, or doesn't include that, and so there's some less capacity in that. So that's what this represents, our internal reorganizations. You might remember what we said is minimal fee increases because, you know, as the city's structural imbalance has been going on, individuals in the community have had the same thing, and we said we don't want to make that worse for them. And we've done very few in the past, and this budget also suggests very few to try to balance the general fund. So these fee increases represent about $42,000, $43,000. One, it's in the toxics program, and also minimal on the recreation side, so very little. On the council travel and memberships, what we've done is the council contingencies this year is $100,000. We've reduced that by $22,000 and moved council travel and memberships in like National League of Cities and Mayors, U.S. Mayors Conference, and taking it out of those dollars. So we've just transferred those dollars out of the contingency to pay for those. Major maintenance in the Holt Center, we'll continue to do the major maintenance, but what we're doing is right now there's $200,000 of general fund that goes towards that maintenance. And so we're going to wean them off of that, $100,000 in FY13 and the second $100,000 in FY14. What that means is they'll still need to do the major maintenance, but they're going to have to now operate in a way that they're able to collect those dollars differently, so they won't be general fund dollars. And then there's some other kinds of things that are appropriate for a funding shift. A good example of that is in our sustainability program. What we've said is there's a better way to fund one of those positions using some other funding sources that we have, and so we've shifted that, and so we can maintain that the program as it currently is. Administrative changes, these are a variety of things. Non-reps, we've already said they're getting a no COLA as we move into FY13. With bargaining units, EPEA, right. The police union, they're currently under a current contract, and so we'll obviously honor that current contract, and that includes a COLA into the next year automatically as part of their current contract. The other three bargaining units contracts are up this year, and so we'll be entering into negotiations with them and just kind of work through like we always do with that. Memberships, there are other memberships throughout the organization that we're holding in abeyance. So, for example, I belong to the International City Managers Association. I won't be. Starting in FY13, we'll hold that in abeyance, and we're doing those kinds of things throughout the organization. And then there are vacant positions that we are continuing to look at. There's 3 non-sworn positions in police that are included in that. There's some vacant positions throughout the various departments as we take a look at that. Internal Service Fund changes. These are the kinds of things that, these are the funds that support the rest of the organization, and they continually look for ways to be efficient, and in doing that, to keep their costs down. We talked briefly before about the health, our health insurance rates. They are going up, but they've done a lot to actually decrease the slope of the increase compared to national averages, and so we're actually doing better than some other agencies with the rate of increase, so that's a positive. And so we're continually looking for ways to save money, and I'll give our folks some credit. They've been very creative in figuring out how to do some of these things and continue to maintain the services that we need internally to, as best we can, to support. All of this represents 20 positions that will be decreased. This is, in relative terms, or 80 up to this point. This represents 20 of those. Not all of those positions are filled. I do anticipate that we will actually lay some people off, which we haven't done before, involuntarily leave the city organization. What happens is through contracts, somebody their position may go away, but then there starts to go to this bumping process depending on positions and contracts and things like that. So more employees are actually impacted, but when we think about the number of positions, it'll be decreasing by 20. We'll be at fewer FTE per capita, the least FTE per capita than we have been in 25 years at least. And so FY13, you can see where that kind of dips down a little bit. So I wanted to go back to the slide where we said that was in the budget 3 years ago. We're over on the right side of that table. We're not doing rolling brownouts or closing a fire station, but we are looking at eliminating a second company. It does have another benefit of increasing ambulance capacity, but there's 3 positions that would go away. We're not closing a branch library or the downtown library for days or permanently, but we are reducing the branch library hours. We're not closing neighborhood parks, but as you saw, we did reduce park maintenance by about $31,000. We're not closing a pool. We're not reducing planners. We are doing some PDD reorganization that will result in 3 positions that will be going away. They're not all planners. We're not reducing our sustainability, equity, human rights, or neighborhood programs. We're not reducing community service officers. And we're not reducing jail beds. We're actually funding those into the future. So in a sense, that's an add, not a reduction. If you were to look back at the last list, that's what that represents there. Kind of the next steps, but just from my perspective, it's not an easy budget. I mean, it is what it is, and you know, we've kind of gotten to the place that we are. I am encouraged, however. I think if just kind of thinking about where we've been the last 3 years and how much has actually been done before we've gotten to this place, I don't think there's necessarily a lot of organizations and cities of our size or any size that have really gotten to that place. And this isn't where we want it to be. And we don't know what it's going to be next year as we go. The impacts of the recession just don't stop. The county, how some of that will roll itself out, will have some impacts or not. Some of those we won't know until FY14. But I think the decisions that you have all made in the last couple of years have really enabled us to be thoughtful as we go. Because what we've consciously done is we've said, let's not use one-time money for ongoing expenses, so we haven't been drawing down the reserve. We've been maintaining that savings account. It allows us to bridge some of these gaps as we've gone over the last few years, and I think allows us to, as best we can, align all of this behind what you said are your goals, and continuing to maintain services, minimize impacts, and create that stable budget. So with that, we'll be here for questions from now until whenever.
Till whenever? No, until 7. Before we start, I think I am going to use the clock just so we make sure everyone gets a chance to speak. And just for our new members, we've got timers. We've kind of established this protocol the last few years of 2 minutes that you get to monopolize the conversation. That doesn't include the time that your question is being answered. And then if you really need to stay right in there and not wait for the next round, you can ask for your super round and get more time added. But I suspect we won't need to worry about that this evening. But just to make sure everyone gets heard, I will ask that we do use the clock. So I saw hands up over here. Counselor Ortiz, and Laura, and Counselor Poling, and Counselor Farr.
So I have several comments, so I'll definitely put me back in the queue after the last speaker. So there's 3 issues that I'd like to speak about that I'd like some feedback for. So the first one is the issue around Kids First, the forensic evidence collection for kids that are abused. The county usually gives them $150K of their general fund. Population-wise, we use about 46% of the services that are offered there. So I don't know if that's something we can look at. If you could have I know that Alex Gardner sent you an email, and I forwarded that. I don't know if I forwarded it to everybody. But I'd really like to see what we can do to maintain that versus looking at what, if they are not able to provide that service for the city and for city folks, how that would look as far as if we could calculate the effect as far as EPD having to do the evidence collection, the witness interview, and actually spend time walking those kids through that process, because it will impact us.
We'll provide that.
Okay, and I'll just wait. Go ahead.
Okay. Laura. So my question, I'm sorry, I missed the retreat on Saturday, so I apologize if this is something that was discussed then, so please just let me know. So one of the documents I think that Pavel or Mia sent me was this kind of meeting the challenge report from a couple of years ago. And I noticed when I read through that one of the things that was recommended, at least at that point by that group, was more of a general service fee rather than service fee increases in particular services. And it would seem to me that there would be benefits in terms of forecasting if you had something kind of more general rather than fee increases for specific services. So I was just curious whether there was a reason that you chose to go with some specific service increases rather than something more like that.
What that meeting the challenge report is about creating a new revenue source. And so that would require putting a new fee into place, which would be a general service fee in that case somehow, and then collecting a new fee. So what we've done is we aren't, this doesn't presuppose any new fees or new revenue sources coming in. What it does say is that we have, our total revenue has over 200 different kinds of sources that come into that. The bulk of that is property tax. And so periodically it makes sense to adjust some of those fees just based on the cost of a program goes up, so that gets passed on. And so what that would contemplate is creating a whole new fee and a whole new revenue source coming in. Yeah, it was kind of a little bit different.
Great, thanks.
Counselor Poling.
A couple of questions. The animal services reduction is $130,000. Is that just for? You said that there's some other models that we're looking at. How far are we from actually working out something, or are we going to reduce that $130,000 and then just not have anything?
We are actively working that right now. We have started to put together some other models and how that would actually work. So what we don't know is all of the impact in Lane County with their budget and on their services. You might know that the guidance from Leanne to their department directors as figure out what 25% less looks like in all your departments. Now you're getting to really, really serious stuff there. So one of the models that we are seriously looking at is actually breaking up the partnership in animal services as it currently exists, that each individual agency would be responsible for their own enforcement. And so we have already started looking at how that would work for us. And then perhaps coming together on the sheltering adoption services through a nonprofit. And so we have been talking and looking. That would have to go out through an RFP process for something like that.
So what is our remaining amount of money that we're giving to animal services, and are we directing where those reductions come from, or are we just saying you have to figure it out?
I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that. Christy, are you the best person to answer that?
I'll try. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, as long as I don't get charged the time. How much are we going to be giving into the animal services, minus the 130,000, what else are we giving? And the second question was, is it, you figured out animal services, where are you going to make the cuts, or are we directing where those cuts are being made?
Well, one of the challenges, I think, and I'll say this about Lane County Animal Services, I think they've done a fabulous job. I want to, kind of say that. The challenge is trying to maintain a high level of service and maintaining the livelihood and humane treatment of animals with reducing dollars that they have available. And so we have been in conversation with Lane County and the City of Springfield and talking about exploring models actually for about the last year. And what we currently provide to them is $585,000 a year, and then they also maintain the licensing revenue that they collect on behalf of the City of Eugene, and so all of those dollars are redirected back into the program. And we have some other dollars that go to trap and release programs with Green Hill and things like that. But one of the challenges that I think the county has had when we've talked to them about the service model is that scaling it just becomes very difficult in terms of just the structure. And so the $130,000, we will be working jointly with them to try to figure out the service model and what that looks like going into the future. So it's a long-winded way of answering your question.
Thank you. And then the reduction, or the LRAPA dues held in abeyance, how is that going to impact LRAPA's budget? I mean, are they going to be short for a year? They're going to have to tap into their reserves? And also, what are the other agencies doing as far as their commitment to LRAPA?
That represents about 3% of their LRAPA. To give you a magnitude of what that is. Springfield and Lane County, Andrea, I don't know if they've actually contributed the last couple years.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
So the impact that us not giving any money to LRAPA is the impact of dollars going back to the DEQ, if I'm correct. It's what they call a maintenance of effort, that they have to show that it's a group effort kind of thing. I'm sure there's a better word for it, but that all of the agencies involved are participating to the best maintenance of effort. And so I don't know how much money we're short, and I can get a better report. I see Nassar, the budget officer, in the audience, and he's hearing this, so I'm sure he'll give us more of a detailed report of the effect of that, because it will mean that they will be having to give dollars back to DEQ. I'm sorry? EPA, excuse me.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. Councilor Farr?
Thank you. I'm going to ask some questions that you can't possibly have the answer to right now, but I'm going to raise them as flags. On page 10, we're looking at human services strategy. And there's a coincidental number of $175,000 reduction in HSC funding, which corresponds, maybe coincidentally, maybe not, to the $175,000 allocated to the potential opportunity Eugene issues that may come up. Now, those issues haven't been identified yet. And clearly, the folks of us who've been at the Opportunity Eugene know that $175,000 isn't anywhere near addressing the list, the long list that, of dreams that people have of what we can do. My comment on this is that we have the one-time funding for Opportunity Eugene, the $175,000, with a $175,000 ongoing reduction for HSC funding. In 1 year, that washes out. In out years, of course, HSC funding continues to receive the $175,000 less. The questions that I'm going to have, if indeed we do take $175,000 and give it to Opportunity Eugene issues, is that in some way supplanting existing, ongoing, successful services that we have identified in the committee that three councilors and I have been working on? Or are we better off leaving that $175,000 in the existing services and letting the $175,000 or whatever number comes out of Opportunity Eugene, that's certainly not going to be the number finally, maybe letting private sources look at funding some of those programs that we're looking at. So I'm certainly, personally, not in favor of reducing $175,000 on an ongoing basis or on a one-time basis to HSC, because I believe we do leverage that money tremendously. we put it in a pot with other agencies that put money together and grants that come into HSC. And HSC takes a very judicious approach to it. May I be back in the queue?
You bet.
Thank you.
John?
I guess my question would be as far as the process goes going forward. What do you see our role here? I mean, you've given us a document that says this is what I propose as a way of funding the gaps. Now, there may be people around this room, there may be people in the community that say, I don't think that's the correct way to fund the gaps. But we don't have the tools to find out maybe there are alternate ways to fund that gap because we don't have the information. And I guess I'd just like to hear from you what you see our process going forward in these next few meetings would be.
I see it somewhat similar that how we've done it before in the sense that, yeah, I think you'll look through it and you'll say, wow, I sure don't think we should get rid of $175,000 of ongoing funding for HSC. There'll be conversation around that. Pat may eventually ask and say, what are the alternatives to that? We can provide alternatives to something like that, as well as any other item that's out here. And eventually, I would guess this body would either say, we'll make a motion that we're going to put that back into the budget and either not replace it with something else or replace it with something else. I think it would be that same kind of a process. And we'd be happy to go through every line item in the entire budget as we go. We really would, because which would be great, because we would be happy to go through all of that with anybody that chooses to do that. But that's how I see the process.
And so I guess the question or some information that I would like to have is, I mean, you guys looked at all of this and you said, okay, this is the best way we see going forward. And one of them may have been, taking the libraries and going from 54 to 24 hours, okay? It might be helpful for us to see some of the ones that were near the top of that list, that is like, well, let's do libraries and let's not do pools. We could have said, let's reduce pools by this many hours. I'm just pulling one up, I don't know where those lists were, so that we might have some tools to say, gosh, you know what, I think that 6 hours at Bethel Library is better and 4 hours less at Sheldon Pool. Right now we don't have those trade-offs in front of us to know what you are working with. So if there's an opportunity for us to maybe see some of those ones, I don't know. But I can see the committee having issues and problems maybe with some of these, and if we knew what the trade-offs might be, rather than using one-time monies to fill this, that might be a way to go. So
one way, we'll show you the list again from the budget from 3 years ago. I mean, that's kind of what we worked on. But we also can, for example, if you were to say, you know what, we want to fund El Rapa, we don't like doing that. So, but what I'm willing to trade off for it is, gosh, can you tell us how many hours you'd have to close the pool to do that? I would say, great, we'll come back and tell you how many hours you want to close the pool. So you don't have to figure out how many hours to close the pool, but if there's something you'd rather do, absolutely, we'll provide you the information on what the equivalent of that is.
Because, I don't want to, it's like before, like George always advocated for, if you're going to fund something, where's that money coming from? And right now, we really don't have the tools to say it's coming from here.
Councilor Ortiz, you're back.
Okay, thank you. So just to follow up on George's issue around El Rapa, City Manager, could you please have a conversation with them and see what we can do? I know in-kind is always somebody spending money, but there are different opportunities that I think, that are happening between government agencies about, sharing a bunk for the time being, moving to the trailer, as Chris would say. Could you, because I think they're looking for those kind of opportunities to show the maintenance of effort that I was talking about. So if you could.
Yeah, we absolutely will. And, to the other agencies, this is the first time they've heard this also. And so we've been conscious to want to tell this group first. And so we will, of course, I'm sure they will approach us as they will approach you, and we'll have those kind of conversations, absolutely.
Okay, and then so one of the other issues I would like to get tracked is what other county services besides law enforcement are considering being reduced that will impact us. I've heard the tax assessor, for one thing. I mean, that's where we get the base of our dollars. I mean, how is that going to affect us in our ability to do our work? So that would be another thing I would hope we could look at. Oh, and so also, the task force that Pat was referring to, we came up with some ideas, and I want to know how they're going to play into this. I think that'd be a conversation. At what point is that going to come to council that we can, so we can discuss it?
We have our last,
There-
go ahead, Mayor. We have our last meeting coming up, so in March, I believe, is when.
I think there's a work session already scheduled.
Is it?
It's on your it's scheduled.
Okay, okay. Great. Put me in the queue.
Mayor Piercy.
Just some quick things that some may seem silly and some might be really good, I don't know. But in terms of the animal services reduction label to this, I think it would be helpful to people understand what you're trying to do if you call it animal services reorganization, because it only looks like you're chopping it from this. And if you're trying to create a different model, then having that be the way it's being delivered to the public seems really important given how volatile this issue is. And I would even say that I think we have for some time thought that maybe there's a better way to do this. So heading out the door with that seems really important. I also know that right now the county's in conversation with many agencies about how they try to live through these reductions and not punish people for having to take reductions. So it does seem right to talk with LRAPA and DEQ about that. And I would guess if we really looked into it, you might find that it's in DEQ's interest to keep LRAPA going because they are they're being whacked at too. So there may be some win-win there that we could go after. I was going to also say if we have a chance to talk to these two neighborhood associations in Bethel and in Coburg area, because I think that this is something that will feel very much like my community. And I think we should look to them for some solutions around, I mean, I don't have any idea what that would mean. We can say we see a need for X, but they may have some local kinds of suggestions for how they can help compensate for some of the things that may be lost for these neighborhoods. And I think you would be probably remiss in not heading out the door and trying to see if there's a way to have those conversations at the front end. So those are my thoughts.
Councilor Moore.
Thank you. Good points, Mayor. With the Bethel Library, at the time we were talking to the YMCA about potentially making the branch library larger, it seems odd to want to reduce funding for it, but that's a different discussion from what I'm going to embark upon. Back to the HSC, I was saying that they leverage the money very well, and they have a very judicious approach to distributing the money. And the question that I have, once again, I'm not throwing fast pitches here, or softballs in this instance, but talk about $300,000 that we allocated in December for Occupy Eugene. $300,000. If we look at the HSC page, we're looking at $325,000 in reductions between the shelter services and the ongoing HSC reduction. 325 to the 300,000 that we, in a city council meeting, allocated to Occupy Eugene. Now we didn't spend that $300,000. So the question that I have is, what happened to that 300? Where was it taken from? How much of it was spent? And where did the balance go? And at some point, I'd like to see how we can weave that back into human services, because this is all human services. And if we're talking about reduction in our funding of LRAPA, well, that doesn't directly affect a child down the block, whereas cutting human services affects a child down the block. And I really have a distinct feeling that things are already being shortchanged on human services, and we are relying on private sources quite a bit. You look at agencies like Food for Lane County that is almost exclusively private sources, and to reduce human services at this point, it doesn't feel right. And I know you've looked at this very carefully, John. I know that
It doesn't feel right to me either.
I know it doesn't. I know it doesn't. But so I was going to make a motion to go ahead and accept this budget as you presented it, but I'm going to not do that tonight. So thank you.
I wonder if you get a second. So I'm in the queue. I do share a little bit of what John raised, because we have had a culture or a habit here in this body in recent years that if we look to add back something that's been proposed to be reduced, that we try to task ourselves to identify where that money is coming from. And we always haven't been perfect about that, but it is something we've made an effort at, and approaching it from this way makes that very challenging to try to figure out, well, what can I propose to do instead? So you may be hearing a lot of requests for more detail or details about other pieces that you haven't presented here. Some of the questions I have is you've alluded to the fact that we will have to lay off some employees, but you didn't really specify what departments those might be in. I don't know if you're not ready to say, but I just wonder how they connect with the other reductions that you've mentioned. So if that would be the libraries, because you're reducing hours, you need to reduce staff. So that's a question I have. And
I can answer some of that right now if you want.
Go right ahead.
One primary reason why we're not talking about it is we do have contractual obligations through the union contracts that we have to adhere to, and part of that is specific notification processes and procedures. And so we'll notify the union first, unions. There's a time period before we actually notify employees. And so that's why you're not going to see any detailed kinds of stuff in here, because we want to respect the contract and we want to respect the employees as well.
So then you probably wouldn't be able to answer my other question about approach to bargaining strategy with the unions and where you might be looking for savings there.
True.
How about some details on the proposed fee increases?
Yeah, we can. Who would know those specifically?
And if you don't have them right this minute, I mean, if they maybe could be provided in writing.
We can do that.
To the
of those
committee.
40,000 or so, yeah, 42,000.
So those were my questions and comments. Councilor Pryor.
Thank you. Probably for me, the place where I am right now, I look at these budget strategies and my first reaction is go, oh my gosh, there's something in here, like you say, there's something here for everyone to not like. Right. But that's where we are. And so for me, the challenge in this budget is not to try to find something that I'm going to like, but to try to tolerate where we want to be. And that raises for me, what's the appropriate altitude to operate in? If we try to operate at 30,000 feet, that's where we say, go figure out how to cut $6 million. I'm done. And then you have to figure out how to cut $6 million. If I zoom all the way down to 1,000 feet, I'm going to say, let's look at this line by line, and I'll tell you in your telephone budget, you need to reduce it from $500 to $400 and take that $100 and move it over. And that's too low, because I don't know the city's operation well enough to know that if you instruct them to cut here, it has a ripple effect somewhere else, and you know that better than I do. So I have to find what is the appropriate altitude to operate at, where we are still providing direction, which is our job, but not being prescriptive in terms of taking your job away from you. And so I want us to be more specific than to say, go figure out $6 million. But I don't want to be so specific as to say, bring me a line-by-line budget, because I'm going to start going through this and second-guessing you in terms of where that should be. So for me, it's a matter of zeroing in on the areas where our comfort level is. What are the priorities? What are the preferences? What are those things that we are comfortable with? And then keep throwing it back to you to say, here's what we're comfortable with. Give us a trial balloon on that, and you'll bring it back and we'll say, I'm comfortable with that, or I'm not comfortable with that. And so I may need another round, but I can give you examples of what I'm talking about in terms of how we together can begin to zero in on this and not play our appropriate positions.
Councilor Taylor.
Thank you. First, what I think is good, if we have to reduce library hours, is to do it in the branch libraries instead of downtown, because everyone can come downtown, and we have no branch libraries in South and West Eugene, South and Southwest Eugene. So I think it's much more fair to reduce the hours in the branch libraries, though I do think branch libraries are good, and eventually we should have them all over. I'm very concerned about not funding a wrap-up. I heard a remark about a child doing something affecting a child. Well, the air we breathe affects all the children, and I think El Rapa is very influential in affecting the air we breathe. And I think it's our duty to support it. There's some things outside, or some things that are in cooperation with other people that I think are our duty to do, rather than saying that's something that's outside the city. Animal services, you said something about enforcement. What does that mean, dog catchers?
Yeah.
So each city would do their own, and how? Just quit doing
We'll work through the how, but the intent would be is that each organization or each agency, the city of Springfield currently does their own, and so it would be the Lane County and the city of Eugene each taking responsibility for our own.
We support those trucks that go around.
We do right now, yes, we do as part of this money that we give to them, or we transfer to them.
But you're suggesting that we do that some other way, or?
We would do it some other way.
Let
We
the
would
dogs
take
run
responsibility for it. I don't know specifically how that would operate for us, but that's what our intent would be, yes.
Okay. I approve of reducing the lobbying efforts. I think we do track way too many bills and lists and lists of them. I think a lot of them are sort of insignificant and don't really affect us. But I don't know who decides which ones. After a few years on the IGR committee, I've seen all of those long lists of bills. And I think Councilor Farr has told us it doesn't make any difference anyway.
Not my words.
Not your words? Something of that sort. I think you've said, do you think they're watching what we do? No? Okay. National League of Cities, were you talking of not joining National League of Cities?
No, that would be part of that contingency dollars.
I think it's really important. They do a lot for cities.
It would just be paid for as that contingency piece as opposed to...
Yeah, okay. And I guess that's it. Is that El Rapa, is that because... Stop mid-sentence.
You can finish your sentence, Councilor.
Because the other governments are not supporting it?
No, it's really all about taking a look at a $7 million gap. We've done $20 million to this point. We're really on that far side of the equation on those boxes up there. If you even look at this, we've even captured more of that $7 million on the left side. At some point, you just have to start looking at what's there. And so what we have tried to do is look through a couple lenses. One has to do with aligning behind what the council goals have said that you want us to do, and that's what that is, and try to best mix the services to provide that. We want to try to do those kinds of things that at some point into the future we could reinvigorate if new dollars come into the system, so we're not just completely decimating anything. We've looked at it through a triple bottom line kind of a lens that says we still want to balance social equity and environmental and our economic development, our economics. So that's important for us. So we've all of that. So taking all of that, we've said, here's where we think we can best get that $4.4 million for this first year. And so that's what it is. So it's not about whether they contributed it or not.
Oh, I'll stop. Put me down again.
Okay. Doug.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on Councilor Pryor's comments, and I know John would be disappointed in me if I didn't say anything after he mentioned pools, so I will. Personally, I'm going to tend to rely a lot on your great executive team. I know that when this would be the first round fiscal year that we've talked about laying off employees. for the first time, and I certainly don't like presiding over a budget where, people are going to be losing their jobs. I mean, some of those people are going to be major breadwinners for their families, and they're going to be hurting, and I absolutely take no joy, and none of us here do. But I will be leaning heavily on the executive team's work on this. I know they painstakingly went through it line item by line item, and I'm going to rely on them as a budget committee member for their expertise in this area. I mean, there's a reason that they're doing what they're doing, and we don't have privy to a lot of the questions that we'll have. I mean, as far as, some revenue-producing programs to, who else can provide services. There's just a lot of things that we don't know that they do know. So that's where I'll be coming down on FY13. Okay.
Councilor Ortiz.
Thank you. So I've got the calendar, and so you're telling me that on the next one that comes out on Thursday, that work session on...
I'm sorry, I thought it was...
That's what it was I was asking about. Our task force.
HSC task force.
The last meeting is before you go on break, and what I know, there wasn't an open work session to get it in before the break, and so council's getting a full report from Michael before your break, and I thought there was a meeting scheduled when you come back, so April 11th.
Can you clarify what committee you guys are talking about?
The Opportunity Eugene Task Force.
No. Like,
Oh.
Human services.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Andrew. I misunderstood. That is not scheduled yet, but we can schedule that. I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
Well, I think it's really pertinent to this year's budget.
Right.
And so I would really appreciate it if we could bring it forth and perhaps send, I don't know if they've already sent out electronically the report to the other budget members, but I would hope that it would have been done. My next issue or comment is about the fire station. So I think that last year when this was presented to us, it wasn't real clear to me, and I think I know a lot about the fire department from my line of work and how they work. It wasn't real clear to me what the chief was trying to do. And after we passed that funding for them to have that dollars, I had several people come up to me who were in the know and say, all the other agencies do this, which is called a swing crew, is what you were saying basically. The unit would be in the firehouse. If they needed a medic, the medic would go out. If they needed to attend to a fire department, a fire, that's what they would do. So can we get really a little bit more meat on the bones around this issue? Because I know for a fact that we're going to be petitioned by the fire union. And so I just want to make sure that we have our ducks in a row before we get to that point.
You bet. And the chief, he'll be the one that will want
Yeah.
to make sure he's the one talking
Yeah.
about it. I won't even attempt to.
But just, I think that really, it strikes at our heart, it's really an issue around safety and about equity. And so I think, I'd really like a little bit more on that.
So I'm going to call Mark next, but then I have a number more people in the queue than we have time left in the meeting if you all took 2 minutes and got answers to everything. So I'm just going to ask if you have an information request that you can put in writing to take that approach. Maybe some of this conversation will have to continue at our next meeting. Just ask for your patience. Mark.
Thanks. I just have a couple clarification questions, and one is in regard to the jail beds. So the $350,000 number, that's the current level from the one time from last year's budget. Is that right?
That was the amount that was approved, yes, by the council last time, so that would be carrying forward as an ongoing.
And does that equate to the 10 beds?
It equates to the 10 beds.
Okay. And then in relation to the Ridgeline and natural area number, the 30+ thousand, that seems like a pretty small number compared to that entire parks and open space budget. But is that, in the impacts paragraph, it talks about less staff presence. Does that include FTE reduction? And maybe you can't say, but I'm curious about where that 30,000 comes from out of the overall parks budget or specific to the Ridgeline natural area portion of it.
If we can follow, we can get specific information on that. I would prefer not to talk about the personnel side
That's
of
fine.
it at the moment, but we can provide that other information.
Okay.
John.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. One, and this can come back in memo or whatever. So on the internal service fund changes, we're doing changes to risk and health, facilities, IS, and fleet. If we could get a breakdown of what those are, especially the risk. I know in the past, last year, we made changes to our risks. Would be wanting to know where we're going with how much risk the city's taking on as an organization, and seeing what that has, whether Marnie has to get back to me on that or whatever. Just, I know that we're taking on more and more of the self-insured type things, and that's something that as a citizen member, I'd like to know where we're at as far as an organization with our exposure to ongoing risk.
We'll provide that.
Thank you. And then the other thing that I would like to know is, we're talking here about general fund. There are, in the past, we've heard of several other funds that were either in trouble or on the precipice of trouble, and I'd like to have an update about some of those. I know we're doing better on ambulance transport, but it would still be nice to know, is that at a precipice? Where are we going with that? Road fund, parking. I know that we've made significant changes to the parking fund structure, with its debt service, also with its contribution to general funds. So these aren't in here, but they have impacts on this potentially down the road. So it'd be nice to know how our other funds are looking. General fund, we did the general fund forecast, but there's other ones. So that I think help the overall picture.
Okay, we can do that.
Councilor Zelinka.
So the jail beds, that we bought 10 and it's staying at 10?
Yes, we buy more than 10, but that's what this represents.
Right, this 350 was for 10. Okay. On the ambulance and fire station stuff, I did Andrew's request for that. I also concur with the mayor. This is really animal services reorg. I agree with Betty that reducing hours is better than, and the branch libraries is better than at the main library. So the LCOG dues, some of it's for contracts, but the bulk of it is for membership dues. How does that affect LCOG?
I can answer that. The total of all of the dues paid by all the jurisdictions amounts to less than 5%, probably more like 3 or 2% of their total budget. So it's more of a symbolic than real impact, but I think continued participation would actually be more important than whether or not there was a large amount of money.
I understand Springfield didn't pay last year, right?
Yeah, and Lane County is being actually given a significant concession simply because of their condition.
Okay. On the Ridgeline Natural Area Maintenance, that's going to be, they're not going out and removing blackberries and things like that on the Ridgeline Trail. Can you get us a map of that park or that area that would be affected? So the IGR reduction, so that's contracted for services that we do for tracking bills?
Yeah, for example, is it Adam? We hire somebody, Brenda has somebody hired up in Salem, and so we will no longer be hiring that person.
Right, so that's a contracted for service.
Right,
okay.
right.
And the mental health court, I understand a $50,000 reduction, but it won't result in a level of service change. How does that work?
Yeah. Yeah, so it'd be on TV.
We have worked with Lane County Mental Health Services, and what we had been paying them was $100,000 to administer that program and work with the defendants, clients that were coming over. And what they said is they'd be willing to, for 1 year, reduce that contract amount to $50,000 and maintain the same level of services. So that is specifically for our contract. And then during the next 12 months, the court administrator and the judge are going to take a look at, is there a way to maintain that cost reduction strategy and still have a mental health court program, and also look at how effective the existing program has been. So.
One more question. So the non-represented employees that get a zero COLA, how many people is that? How many?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
John and his crew.
Oh, no, it's like 600 people.
Yeah, it's 5 to 6.
Non-represented is everybody not in the union, right?
450-ish, 450 to 500.
Really?
It's about a third.
A third of the workforce.
So, supervisors.
Interesting.
Thanks.
Shanda.
So I just have one quick question. In the general fund strategy document, it mentions over the past 3 years, the organization has reduced more than 20 million. Is that an annual footprint reduction? So every year our budget is 20 million, yet less than it was 3 years ago?
We've actually reduced ongoing costs of
Right.
20 million, right? I mean, there's a little bit miscellaneous in there, but
So ongoing costs.
ongoing, because you have to get the ongoing to get those lines together.
So then we need another 7 million ongoing, 4.4 million of which will be tackled.
That's what we're recommending we tackle this year, 4.4. Yeah.
Good. Back to Councilor Pryor.
In light of the time, I can wait and do mine later on.
Okay. Laura.
Mine is also a request for additional information, so if you tell me to whom that should be addressed, I will do it that way in writing. Okay.
Mia.
Okay, Mia, I'll send my stuff to you.
And also to let you know, if you have general comments that you want to share with the Budget Committee, you can do that, and it's a public email, so that also serves as getting out to the public. And I don't know if they would send that to you and you'd send it out, if we could share with everyone that email address that they can send to everyone. So it's another way to just get your perspective out there, not at a formal meeting. Mayor Piercy.
So one of the things that I'm curious about, given that we talked about membership moving over into contingency, I'm wondering about our entire budget for travel, for going to meetings and conferences and all of those things, and whether we could have a report on that, and if it's a desire, folks around the table, since that's sort of council-specific, there could be a council subcommittee or something that could look at that and make some recommendations, because I don't know if you looked at how much we're spending in that and what we're having to cut, whether we'd make some different choices or not. So I think it would be it's a fair thing to think about, but I think the council should have a special role in looking at that as opposed to the whole budget committee. So I just suggest that. And the only other comment I wanted to make is this begs us to look at things individually. But I think the essence of this is trying to keep all our boats floating. So it's not a comparison in my mind between do we have clean air to breathe or do we pay for public services. These are all things that are really, really, really important. So if we have to make cuts, then it seems to me we sort of need to look at how we carve in a way that allows all boats to keep floating. Not floating as well as they were before, but all floating instead of losing some things that are very essential for the well-being of people of our community. I don't imagine we're going to like any of this. But I think you have to sort of look at it in that kind of, are we doing enough to keep our infrastructure? Are we doing enough to at least do what we can around humans? I'm trying to look across all those areas that we have responsibility for and trying to be sure we're doing each of them.
Councilor Taylor.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, well, I think Ellen already asked about LCOG, and that covers that. The main question I wanted to ask is, are we going to discuss new sources of revenue? That's all.
We're not proposing any, so it would be up to you if you choose to do that.
Then presumably, Budget Committee members could look at the list that they got at our so-called retreat, which I think is a rather ridiculous name for an all-day work session, but and see if they want to suggest any of those. Thank you.
Councilor Polling.
Reference to the branch libraries. I know the one at the Sheldon Plaza is actually serving 3 different neighborhood associations now, maybe 4, and particularly a high concentration of multifamily housing. That's retirement, affordable housing, apartments. You've got the school there. Mike, I've got a couple of questions. Is if we could get a breakdown of the number of people visiting the branch libraries, the types of activities that they offer versus what's offered here at the main library, and of those, which activities are going to stop, and how will the additional visitors impact the main library and its services. And I'll have to disagree with Betty on this one, but not everybody can come downtown. I know when I go by the branch library there at Sheldon Plaza, I see some people that are just barely able to make it to the branch library, and they're very grateful that we do have that. So if I can get that kind of information back, I'd appreciate it.
Councilor Farr.
Thank you. I was just going to, I'll pass.
Okay. Doug.
Betty took my question. I'm going to be very interested in your ideas and your exec team's ideas on additional revenues to help close that gap. And I know there's been proposals out there that we haven't put forward, like a payroll tax and restaurant tax, and those aren't popular ways to get revenue for sure. But are there like user fees, or is there something out there that we could tap in to bring in some more revenue? Because that's certainly our problem. When we don't have revenue coming in, it affects our expenditure side. So I'd be very interested in new revenues, ongoing.
All right, Councilor Zelenka, you're our last in the queue.
Oh, I wasn't clear. Were we going to get a better explanation of the impacts on El Rapa? Was that part? Or I would like one.
What we'll be able to do is, and
quite
again,
understand what all I meant.
this is the first time they will have heard this, and so we will circle back with various people and talk to them and try to give you a better sense of that, so we can do that.
All right. Well, I'm going to take up our last couple of minutes. Thank you very much. What I'm thinking is that we'll build some time into our next meeting, because not everyone got a chance. Some people are probably like me. You're still processing this and trying to figure out how you want to come at it in terms of your questions. So, next meeting, there'll still be opportunity to have the same kind of dialogue as well as get the answers. Hey, we're not adjourned yet. Get the answers to the questions that you had. And I would ask, could we see Councilor Taylor refer to some strategies that were discussed at the retreat? I don't know if there's a document that came out of that, which was asking about new revenues. So if there's a piece of the council retreat materials that could be shared with the budget committee, that would be great. And I just wanted to reiterate something that the city manager said last night at a presentation he made to members of boards and commissions from around the city about trying to achieve some balance and looking at this as a balance between needs. And I really appreciated that framing, and I think that speaks to the idea of trying to keep all of our boats afloat. It's that same idea that we're not prioritizing one thing over another. We're trying to achieve some balance between our priorities and work towards each of the ones that the council has identified. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Yes, it is. It's all learning, right?